Hello and welcome to another episode of the GCSUNScast, the longest running Gold Coast Suns show on the interwebs, thanks to our Patreon sponsors, Dale Snelling, Paul Vosti, Robbie Fiorini, Brody Burgess, Tom Kim and Tim. Thank you for supporting the show over on patreon.com/GCSUNScast. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. And I welcome back to the show, Cal Twomey. Welcome back, Cal.
Hey Shane, how are you? It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you for making the time to come on. And we'll pick your brain on some of the young talent coming up in the Gold Coast Suns Academy, and also some of the young talent that's on the Suns list while we've got you.
Now, Shane, before we start though, I do want to check something. Are you recording the show? Have you pressed record? Because I know one of my workmates, I'm sure we'll get to him, he shall not be named at this point, but you did a podcast with Mitch Cleary earlier in the year, and look, I never heard it. So I just want to make sure you're recording this one. It's going to be all good.
I'm definitely recording this show. I was definitely recording the last show with Mitch as well, but you know how computers work sometimes, and sometimes they just don't want to do what you tell them to do.
No, I hear you. Just playing with you. We've all had those stuff-ups. The first interview I ever did, Shane, or one of them anyway, was with Billy Brownless, and I was 14 or 15, and I went in to interview him at SEN. I had the recorder on. He said, "Are you sure it's on?" I said, "Yep." Did the interview for about 15 minutes, walked out, went to listen to it, and realised it hadn't worked. So I've never forgotten the lesson of that.
Oh, that would have been funny. You would have enjoyed watching Billy go down the slide yesterday?
Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? And obviously a good cause, so it's just a shame there wasn't 80,000 people there watching it.
When are you going to get the opportunity to go down the slide, Cal?
Don't be silly. I never. I wouldn't have thought.
I think with the notoriety you yourself, Mitch and Riley are getting from AFL Exchange, we might see you guys up there next year. Maybe right. Tie you all together and go down as a threesome.
Well, yeah, there's a few outfits we could roll with, but it's we'll see how we go.
All right. Well, let's jump into the first lot of questions I've got for you. You did a great job presenting the mid-season draft. It's only the second time we've had a mid-season draft, and it turned out to be a bit of a ruck draft, as the meme that was going around. What do you make of Will Moyle for the Gold Coast Suns? He doesn't look like he's going to get a debut this year. It would probably be unlikely, especially considering he's still quarantining in northern New South Wales before he can join the main group. What can you tell us about Will?
Yeah, Ned's he's a good player. I really like him. He's a prospect who, if he had stayed in the draft pool, I mean, who knows where he would have ended up? Somewhere in the top 25 to 30, I'd imagine, because of that height that he has. He's 205 and potentially getting taller, who knows? But he's got some aggressiveness. There's a bit of Shane Mumford about him. There's a little bit of Max Gawn about him. And I think that the way the draft panned out, I mean, Hawthorn definitely had an interest in Ned Moyle. They were speaking to him up until a day before the draft, and they had pick 2 clearly. Now, in the end, they had to take John Newcomb because they knew that if they didn't take him at that point, he would probably be picked off before their second pick. So they'd sort of went that way with that commitment. In the end, it was the perfect result for the Gold Coast because I think he was the guy that they would have wanted all along. A young ruckman, someone who's 19, who can step in as a long-term player for them, continues the bracket and group of Oakley Chargers who have joined the club, obviously, over the past few years. But, yeah, he's a guy that I think, look, if he doesn't play this year, he won't be far off, I'll put it that way. This little break in games might hurt him, and obviously it's coming out of a lockdown period, then into a quarantine period, then into getting to the club and working all that out. But I do think that he won't be far away. And, yeah, I think the Suns had their eyes on some other mature ruckmen, and I'm sure that's probably the way they would have ended up going if Ned had gone at pick 2 and what would have happened after that point. Would they have taken Ash Johnson? Would they have taken Jackson Callow potentially? But those are some other guys, the what-ifs, and what could have been. In the end, I think it was a really good result for the Suns to grab Ned Moyle at that point.
Yeah, Ned Moyle. Let's just make that clear. I was reading the question and I wanted to ask, will Moyle make a debut? I forgot his name was Ned. But so Ned Moyle, there was a bit of a kerfuffle leading up to the draft where it sounded like he may have failed a medical test. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the AFL sent out to clubs on the night off the draft some information relating to a heart issue that had come up late in the piece, and not necessarily an issue, but just something that required a little bit further attention from a medical perspective. So that one came through, but I don't think it was off the level of concern that has seen other players drop down draft boards and all of that. I think that the main bit was just that the AFL let the clubs know, half an hour before the draft started, that the full information, a full picture of where things stood wouldn't be available until a couple of days later. Now, this is just an overall picture of some of the difficulties faced by clubs when recruiting throughout this year and in the lead up to the NAB AFL mid-season rookie draft, in that, the COVID complications, the capacity to interview players in person, the ability to have your medical, workers and doctors go and assess players on a medical level. It became a whole lot more difficult in Victoria around that point. So he was probably caught up in that. So I think that he'll get to the Gold Coast and obviously have a real level of confidence that we'll see a fair bit of him over a long time. And as I said, I think there's that aggressive streak in him and he can use the ball pretty well. And his performances for Collingwood's VFL side were pretty impressive too. And the Oakley Chargers as well. I mean, everyone's been watching the Oakley Chargers, as they always do down here, because they produce upwards of 8 to 10 players most seasons across drafts. And obviously they've got a potential number one at their midst as well this year in Nick Dacos. And I think Nick will miss Ned Moyle being there for the Chargers because he was feeding it down his throat a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, so the heart issue is nowhere near to the extent of that. I think the last one I can remember was Jaden Stephenson dropping down the draft order quite dramatically. Nowhere near to that extent then?
No, not as far as I'm aware. And look, that one was a different sort of case as far as what I'm told, yeah.
Okay. So further on in the draft, the Suns did have a second selection, and it was actually quite surprising to most Suns fans to see that they didn't choose to utilise that second selection. I've got a theory that's because Jackson Callow was selected with the very prior pick by Hawthorn. Do you feel like that was the case? There was a lot of talk the Suns would go after a Wiley Buzzer or some other mature age players, and they decided just not to act on it.
Well, I think the Wiley Buzzer discussion, and leading into that, there was the Michael Knoll discussion as well before his medical issue with his knee. All of that came about in the search for a ruckman. But when they got their ruckman with their first pick, I think that's where the tactics probably changed a little bit, and they think, well, we're going to just go based on talent now, and if we don't have anyone left on our list that we're happy with, then we don't necessarily have to grab them. And look, we have to remember as well, there is a rookie draft, and yes, there is a whole lot of interest in it because it's mid-season. How can these guys help us in the short term, the long term, the medium term, all of that. But it's also worth remembering these guys are rookies, and we don't place the same amount of attention or pressure on or expectation on the guys who are picked as rookies at the end of the year, a day after the NAB AFL national draft. The rookie draft is over in about 8 minutes. Now, this one lasted a little bit longer in the mid-season. It was 22 picks. I agree that I think if Callow was there, they probably would have had a really good look at him because they'd done some work on him in the lead-up and pretty late in the piece as well. But a couple of other clubs are in that same boat too, where they probably thought if Callow's here, we'll take him. If not, then we'll tap out. And clubs went into that mid-season rookie draft with a list of 6, 7, 8 names that they were really happy with on the whole. Some even had 3 to 4, and that included Jacob Edwards and a lot of them Ned Moyle as well. So it made sense for me that if the guys that you don't like aren't there, don't go and add a bloke just for the sake of it because you can. Also worth remembering as well, as you well know, the Suns have the biggest list in the AFL. It's not as if they're crying out for players right here and right now, I think.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of the lead up to that draft was very much a Ducks and Drakes scenario as clubs were jostling to outwit each other. let's look ahead to the coming draft. The Gold Coast Suns have a lot of academy coming through. What sort of talent is in the academy for the Gold Coast Suns this available for this draft?
Yeah, there's a little bit out there. So they obviously have access to Ozzie Harris, who's a small back, small forward, who's part of their academy. He's played for the NAB AFL Academy as well earlier this year as a small back with a bit of power. So he's one that they'll look at. Ned Stevens is out of the Darwin area academy, a tall defender who's also a part of that NAB AFL Academy program. So in that sort of upper echelon in terms of the pathway coming through. Jai Lockett, clearly the surname there has captivated a little bit of interest. He's the nephew of Plugger, Tony Lockett. So I've seen a bit of him, and he certainly is a really good kick and a sort of roaming forward, a prospect who, when he gets his shots, he converts them. And Will Bellows, a player I know you've sort of thrown up as a key forward, who's played a bit of VFL stuff, and they're the sort of names who I think the Suns would be looking at through their academy. But there isn't the guys like last year, Joel Jeffrey and Alex Davies, who I'm sure we'll get to at some point in our chat, who were tipped as really early picks from a long way out. I don't think there's that group for the academy and the Suns this year. And then there's the other question as well that will be answered later in the year about whether the Suns will have to actually match bids on academy players again this year, and that also might impact who they pick and how many they take.
Yeah, that is another scenario to consider. Like just the names that we just listed there, it doesn't sound like any of those players at the moment are tracking to be top 20 selections. So you would think that would fall in the favour of the Suns of if it does come to having to match a bid. Do we have a timeline for when the AFL are going to decide on whether they're going to have to match bids in the future?
I think it happens after the home and away season if the Suns don't make the finals. So it's one of those decisions that'll be late in the year. Don't expect them to make the finals at this point. So I think after round 23, I'd imagine that will happen.
Okay,
one way or the other.
All right, and something I've noticed on AFL Exchange is you're very quick to point out some of the young talent coming through as your boy. What Suns player do you claim as your boy? And you can only pick one.
Oh, how old is young? Like, what are we talking? Because there's, there's a fair backlog of players who have made their way to Gold Coast over a number of years that I would consider my boy.
Well, let's say 3 years.
3 years. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, it's probably got to be Noah Anderson, I'd say. I watched a lot of Noah coming through, obviously, and got to know him pretty well. He even shot us a video today asking why we haven't signed up as members on Twitter, which was nice to see. But, yeah, Noah's a really good player. I know he probably wasn't as good on the weekend. We probably had a few mates on the weekend, but he's... I think had a pretty impressive season. Second year, people forget that maybe he's into, game, what is it now, 25 to 30 or around that little mark of his career. But, yeah, really talented player and good person. Got his own sort of style and sense of humour. And, yeah, he's a pretty natural guy, Noah, so I think he's pretty popular up there.
Yeah, he's certainly become a favourite among the fans, especially now that I guess over the last 12 months, he hasn't had the shadow of Matt Rowell next to him, and he's sort of been able to dominate games at his own stead. A lot of Suns fans have really sort of stood up and taken notice of just how much talent Noah Anderson has. And it was probably pretty evident on the weekend when the Suns were struggling that Noah Anderson was nowhere to be found because he's already become such a crucial cog in that Suns midfield. And obviously, speaking of the game on the weekend, Gold Coast Suns, 6 goals, 13-49, were defeated by Freo, 11 goals, 10-76, a 27-point loss. Rankin and Burgess, the only multiple goal scorers with 2 apiece. And there weren't too many players on field that can hold their head up. Probably only 2 I can think of, being Miller, 31 disposals, 13 contested, 6 score involvements and 1 goal. He's quickly becoming the only Suns representative that can hold his hand up for the All-Australian, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he is, and he's probably in that All-Australian mix as a squad. I don't think the side's probably gone well enough to put him into the conversation as a first 22 player. But yeah, I mean, his running power's been highlighted and it's been extreme. And I know Michael Whiting at AFL.com.au wrote a really good story about him on the weekend and just how impactful his season has been. So yeah, he's stood up. And look, I've been a Will Powell fan for a little while too. I mean, even looking back at his draft, 2017 draft, and he was such a shock pick. No one had seen him. And, it was the end of that first round, and he's picked 19, wasn't he, from memory? And now if you redid that draft, he's stacking up really well. And, yeah, it's a good selection for the Suns. And he's aerobic. He's sort of elastic in the way he plays too. He stretches and kicks well above his head. And he's almost, he's still got the boyish looks about him, doesn't he? I think he's got a long way to go in terms of his development, so there's a lot to like about Will Powell. But, yeah, as you say, I mean, everyone was watching that Gold Coast Freo game on the weekend, and they were pretty disappointing across the day. They had their moments, and they just didn't, as you say, nail them. 6-13. I mean, the game was up for grabs for a period there in the second quarter and third quarter, and they didn't get just didn't go for it or weren't able to convert their shots. And yeah, for the first time in a little while, Ben King was muted, I guess you could say, and they managed to shut him down pretty well. And from there, the Suns couldn't get rolling.
Yeah, too many of the Suns players I thought were passengers on that day. Roses, Graham, Smith, Anderson all struggled, and they'll probably be lucky if any of them hold their spot in the side next week. Lukosius had a down game, and that's been shown on a few media outlets. A bit of a lack of defensive when it comes to some of his defensive efforts. But what did work, obviously Tuke Miller just continuing his dominance. We've spoken about Will Powell, but Sam Flanders, he's really starting to show what he can do when exposed at AFL level. I think he's had almost a dozen games of football now, and there's a reason why the Suns were quick to pounce on him at pick 11 when he'd slid down that far, because I think you'd even predicted him to go at about pick 5 in his draft.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. I mean, there was a reason clearly, and it was the power, it was the spring, it was the ability to kick goals. I think he's taken a little bit of time to build the confidence that he does belong at AFL level. And you talk about the shadow that Matt Rowell cast on Noah Anderson. I personally don't think that that's really a shadow. I think that that's something that Noah's known, and in his eyes, and as they should be, they're equals. They've grown up together. They've been through every team together. And right here, right now, I know Noah hasn't got as many Brownlow votes, but he's played more games. He's been more durable, and he's put more performances out on the park than Rowley. But I would say that playing or being drafted alongside those two as a pair would have been difficult in some ways for Sam Flanders to come in and be able to match what they've done. So, I like what he's done, and he's played pretty much every game. I'm just looking now, pretty much every game since round 4. So he's managed to, I know he's subbed there once, I think, but getting a little bit more of the footy, and I agree that he was among the highlights on the weekend and looking set to sign a new 2-year deal, which is obviously a good sign as well that he's settled in a little bit better. Yeah.
Speaking on players that are sort of in the shadow of another player, I want to talk about Ben King. In his draft year, it always seemed like Max King was the one everyone was talking about. But Ben King's really come into his own up here on the Gold Coast away from his brother. And Max is actually going through a really rough patch this year with the Saints and his goal kicking and the controversy that comes with that being down in Melbourne. Do you think Ben might be thanking his lucky stars he's away from that sort of media roasting down there?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because roasting or just attention, there's two sides of it. I always thought about the Suns, do they benefit? Is the overall benefit a good thing for them that they don't cop the media attention, or do they lack the media focus sometimes when, as a club, they don't perform and, you're able to go down the street and not catch the questions of every cafe owner or bartender or, passerby about your performance. So there was sort of both sides of the coin there, but I do think that a part of the Max King story has always been the comparison to Ben and how those two shape up. And so far this year and so far throughout their career, really, I mean, Max had a later start because of his knee injury and then his ankle injury in his first year at AFL level. So he's sort of a year behind in some ways. But clearly Ben has had a fantastic season. And I'd love for Ben to kick 50, 55 goals this year because I think that'd be a huge step for him and really show the development that he's got and done. And, there'll always be the talk around St Kilda chasing him and all that type of thing. To be honest, if I was St Kilda, I don't think I'd necessarily be going that way. And if I was Ben, I don't think I'd be going that way. I get the lure of playing, with your brother potentially, but also he's the number one at the Suns and, clearly they're building a forward line around him and keen for him to stay and these type of things. So, and if you go to the Saints, then all of a sudden you're sharing that again. So, I mean, he's a fantastic player. He had a bit of a quieter day on the weekend. We still got to remember, as you said, he's 21 now. So still such a long and exciting career. And there's so many key forwards coming into the game and over the past couple of years as well that, I think, have in some ways got his athleticism and agility, and it's such a rare feat. So there's so much to like about him and to build around.
Yeah, you think... I don't know how much contact you would have down with Max King down there, but do you think maybe Ben King picks the phone up to him and sort of gives him some pointers? He's saying, I'm top dog now. Look how many goals I've kicked. Anything like that?
No, I mean, I know those guys pretty well. I don't think they really go down that line too much. They've probably had enough commentary about each other's kicking or, rating and ranking against each other throughout their whole life. I mean, one was pick 4, one was pick 6. I think their enter scores are in the 98s or something. So I'm sure they've always been measured against each other, and they probably don't do it too much against each other between themselves. But, they're both pretty laid-back guys. I'm looking forward to seeing Max sort of get things going in the second half of the season, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, you did mention before about the media scrutiny that comes on the clubs and whether the Gold Coast, whether that benefits or is a hindrance to them, that they don't get the same level of scrutiny that Carlton or St Kilda would be getting. I got to agree with you on that one. I really think the Suns need to be held to a higher accountability now than in previous years. And that's partly due to what we saw in the Amazon documentary earlier this year about how the Suns are now judging themselves at a higher level and basing their performances on wins. And we're not seeing that. So far this year, we've seen 4 wins and 8 losses. And some of those losses have been pretty bad. We thought the floggings might be behind us, but that the half a game against the Bulldogs resulted in a 60-point loss. The game against Brisbane, where they didn't show up, was another big loss. And arguably the game against Fremantle, despite it only being 27 points, falls into that bracket with the performance that some of the players gave. Where do you think the Suns are at this season?
I think they're a little bit behind where they should be. Yeah. I think they should be knocking on the door of the 8. I'm not saying they should be necessarily in it, but I think they should be knocking on the door. And they're probably two wins behind where I think they should be. Yeah. So that's my overall take on it. Now, are there games in there that they've lost that they should have won or could have won? Well, they could have won on the weekend, couldn't they? They should have beaten St Kilda, I thought, the way that game was panning out and was played. They could have beaten Carlton. Could have beaten Adelaide.
Well, I think with the exception of the Bulldogs game and the Brisbane game and the Fremantle game just gone, I think the Suns were actually in front at one point at three-quarter time or late in the fourth against pretty much every opposition. I think I've got that stat right.
Yeah.
So they've definitely had the opportunity to win some of these games and they just haven't been able to get over the line. Do you think that that's an issue they need to address as far as being able to close out games?
Well, close out seasons as well. I mean, it's been the story of the Suns over the past few years, hasn't it? The quick and early starts, the good starts of the season, and then the drop-aways in the second half of the year. And I know even this year it wasn't even their best start. They won 3 out of their first 7, but they were in a couple of more games there they should have won. Now they've won 1 of their last 5, and I think that that should be a game or two better than their trucking. And look, maybe our expectations on the outside were a little bit too strong or too high for what they should have been internally or what they are internally, and that's fair enough. Just because we set the bar in the media and outside the club necessarily doesn't match up with what they said internally, and that's fine. But I do think that, I think they're at this stage where they should be knocking on the door of the 8, and right now they're not.
Yeah. The Gold Coast Suns have today announced that they've reached a membership record of 18,823. And as you said just before, you received a video from Noah Anderson asking you to sign up to be a Suns shout-out member. What do the Suns need to do for the remainder of this year for you to sign up as a member again?
I want daily videos for the next week. I want every contract exclusive. I want breaking news whenever it happens. No, look, I'll probably will. It's hard to say no to Noah. He was very helpful to me during his draft year. Always took my call and went out to his house one day for a chat with him and Matty Rowell, and we did the photos, and he was very helpful for me. So I think I'm pretty sure that will get done soon enough. Although, to be honest, I did spend some time at Port Adelaide as well this year. So obviously spent some time with the Suns a couple of years ago and loved that experience. This year I did it with Port Adelaide. So I might be selling out and going with a couple of late membership drives. So we'll see what Port Adelaide come to the party with. But I think, look, it's hard to say no to Noah, put it that way.
All right. Well, actually, what can we look forward to for the Suns for the remainder of the year? We need to see some sort of improvement, and that obviously comes in the form of actually winning some games in the second half of the season. Is there anything else that we can look at for indicators that would give us an idea of how well the Suns are travelling?
I know it's a number. I'd like to see 8-9 wins. I know that might be difficult at this point. 4 out of the last 10, 5 out of the last 10, or 9 games. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And they just need to get some confidence back. And look, I think that the injury absence of Jared Witts has been such a huge hurdle that they just haven't been able to overcome. And there's been some bit part players who've helped and held the job for little part periods, and to some degree that's worked. But I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see a few of the guys flick into real top gear and the development of some of those players who've been around the club for a couple of years now and step up to that degree. I'd like to see Matty Rowell play out the rest of the season. I think if he plays out the rest of the season uninhibited, that'd be a great win. I think, as I mentioned before, if Ben King plays out the rest of the year, kicks 50, 55 goals, that's a really good win. I think if Isaac Rankin plays the rest of the year, that's huge experience for him to get through the best part of a season and on the back of what we saw last year, really solidify your career. So, and to be honest, I know Jack Lukosius is another one in that period as well. And I've been pretty impressed with what he's done this year, playing a bit more time on the wing. He's probably taken the spot of Rory Atkins a few times as well to some degree. I'd like to see him continue to develop and evolve his game and not always be just the really nice kick and the user, but be really competitive and what he does all the time, and be that guy that you can help build the back line around as well. So there's all these little bits and pieces. Finals clearly are not going to be a factor this year, I wouldn't have thought, unless the club goes on a crazy run in the second half of the season. But yeah, there's a lot to like about the Suns. I just think it's just about all that blossoming together, and you get to the end of the year with a few less injuries. And I don't know what it is about that club, Shane, but injuries do seem to strike Gold Coast and also the Giants, the two newest clubs in the competition, seem to have injury issues every single year. So, they seem to be pretty hard struck on that front.
Yeah, it's absolutely baffling. I've even put it to some people that it's Metricon Stadium, but I've got no idea why we constantly have injuries to not just players in the best 22, but key players in the best 22. The sort of players that you can't really afford to lose through injury. everything from Gary Ablett in the early days to Nathan Bock to recently Matt Rowell and Jared Witts. It's players that the Suns really need to try and get as much out of as they can if they're to have a shot at playing finals football. Now, the VFL side had a great win on the weekend, 17 goals 5, 107, defeated Sydney 16-8, 104. And after the siren kick by Joel Jeffrey sealed the win for the Suns, what did you take out of his game? You were very hot on him last year in the draft. He seems to be coming into his own. He's a very flashy player as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if he makes a debut for the Suns in the AFL side this year.
Yeah, the way he's tracking, and that was a good kick under pressure, wasn't it? He slotted it pretty calmly. I always liked his size. I've always thought that, this is a guy that can play in a number of positions. He can mark above his head. He kicks it well. He's taken a little... They were a tough act to follow, the Rowell and Anderson draft class. And this year's draft class have taken a little bit more time to pick up the pace in terms of what's required at the top level and the ability to get in there straight away. So they've clearly been given more time to do that, and there hasn't been a rush for those guys to play either. But I'm with you. I think that, the Suns have shown, and that's been a really good thing as well, the Suns have shown their confidence in their young players to go and blood them if they're ready, and if they think they're ready. We've seen Mally Rose's little bit of a taste of things over the past little bit as well. Saw Connor Butterick at the start of last year, and he's another injury who I think that the Suns have really missed this year. That probably goes under the radar. But, yeah, Joel Jeffrey had a lot of fans inside, the top 20 of last year's draft, and it would have been fascinating to see where he'd been taken had he not been a sort of pre-selection. So, yeah, there's him, and then there's obviously the great news of Elijah Holland's playing in the VFL this week. So really looking forward to that, and just a little bit of... It's been so long between games for Elijah. The last game he would have played probably would have been on grand final day, I think, in 2019, where he really dominated for the NAB AFL Academy All-Stars. Kicked that long goal from outside 50, then he did his knee the next February. Such a long recovery for him. So looking forward to seeing him out there, and I think he'll bring some real energy to the Suns, and hopefully we see him maybe later in the year, but if not, then just get some games under his belt to head into 2022.
Yeah, it's been so long since Elijah Hollands has played, and we haven't really seen too much of him as Suns fans. He was touted as a number one pick, if I'm correct, just before he hurt his knee, and I think at that stage most Suns fans had sort of put him off the radar as a player that we probably weren't going to get at that stage of the year, and he's just managed to slip down to 7th. What is it that Elijah Hollands does that had him in conversation for that number one pick? What made him so special?
He's a match winner, and that's what we like about him. There's players who contribute to games, there's players who turn games, there's players who make games and own them, and he's the guy who can own games. And yeah, he's done that at all levels he's played. He likes the big moments. He kicks it 55 metres, as I said before. He marks all over his head. He kicks goals. He plays in the midfield. He can be a clearance winner. He's a good size. He's pushing 190 centimetres. I think, as he told the world on his Twitter feed last year, he wanted to get to 190 centimetres. I'm not sure if he actually ticked over that or not, and he's got the confidence. He's got the bit of rock star about him. And yeah, the Crows looked at him for pick 1. The Roos looked at him pretty hard for pick 2 as well. He eventually got through to pick 6, but he's got some real ability. So yeah, it was a shame. Well, I mean, in the end, the knee probably did cost him a few spots in terms of his draft, because there was a few questions from a medical perspective, because no one had seen him play or train really in that period. But it's a great get for the Suns, and it's the most talent-laden list, I think, in the competition. I truly do think that, and still think that. And he's got a huge amount of talent. So yeah, we'll see a bit of him. I'll hopefully see Ben Ainsworth back at AFL level this week as well. Kicked 3 from 20 last week and really come into the game in the second half. So he's a player that I think is too good to be playing at VFL level, and is certainly got some traits that should be on show, and really back in and believe that we'll get to see the best of Ben sooner rather than later.
And before we go, Braden Fiorini, you brought it up on AFL Exchange, how he's struggling to get into that Suns side. We'd love to have him in there, but it's a very tough midfield to break into, isn't it? I don't see how he can get in.
No, I agree. He's contracted till the end of 2023, so he's got 2 more years beyond this. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he does get back to Victoria or not. Whether he's good enough in terms of breaking into the senior side this year to play some footy, or if he just, if the clubs come knocking and suggest that, we'll see him at the end of the season. So, yeah, it'd be interesting. But I think he's, again, as you say, it's a struggle to get into that side and on the wing or play in the midfield, or there's some good players in ahead of him, and it's not through lack of desire for him or lack of effort. He's seen as a future leader a couple of years ago as well at that footy club. So, it'd be fascinating to see where it ends up with him at the end of the season, because, if there's a cap squeeze at all, what sort of money is he on? Will another club be willing to take on his money? All that type of thing comes into the factoring of where a player can end up or go.
Yeah, I think the Suns are desperate to get him into that side. They've tried him in pretty much every position they can on the field, and he just hasn't been able to adapt to those positions. So he's just going to have to bide his time until injury comes along, or he can outperform one of the solid midfield contributors at the Suns. That will do us for tonight's episode. Thanks again for coming on, Cal.
No worries at all, Shane. Enjoyed it. Good to talk Suns, and hopefully next time it's after a win.
Absolutely. Hopefully. I need a win soon. I don't know how much longer I can go without a win. Well, until next time, go Suns.
See you, mate.